Can you obtain American citizenship if you are married to an American? I will answer this question for you in this video and give you some more information about it. My name is Laura and I'm an attorney working in the field of migration law in Switzerland, and I am not an American citizen myself. However, I am married to one, which made me look up the requirements for obtaining American citizenship for foreign spouses. Let's see what I found out. The main regulations regarding if and when you can become an American citizen if you are married to a US citizen can be found in the INA, which is the US Immigration and Nationality Act. When it comes to obtaining American citizenship as a foreign spouse, the first point to consider is age. To obtain citizenship of the United States as a foreign spouse, you must be at least 18 years old when you submit the application form. But I think it's safe to assume here that all applicants fulfill this requirement automatically. The second important requirement to consider is the duration of your marriage. When applying for American citizenship, you must have been living in marital union with your US spouse, meaning with your husband or wife, for at least 3 years preceding your application. When it comes to the definition of living in marital union, the US law states the following. An applicant lives in marital union with a citizen spouse if the applicant actually resides with his or her current spouse. The burden is on the applicant to establish in each individual case that a particular marital union satisfies the requirements of this part. But knowing from my experience, if you're living or if you have been living in an actual marital relationship, proving that is usually not an issue. In addition to being married to your US spouse for 3 years preceding your application, the law also requires that you continue to be the spouse of a US citizen until you take the oath of allegiance, which you will have to take towards the end of the naturalization process. The next point to look at when applying for the US citizenship as a foreign spouse of a US citizen is your residence in the US. And this is very important. When you apply for the US citizenship as a foreign spouse, you must have had your continuous residence in the US for at least 3 years prior to your application. And during these 3 years, you must have been a lawfully admitted permanent resident in the US, a so-called LPR. This pretty much means that only a legal and official residence in the US, which is based on an official residence permit in the US, will be taken into account when it comes to deciding whether or not you fulfill this 3-year residence requirement. Exceptions to this 3-year residence rule can be made if you are married to a US citizen who is employed by the US government abroad, meaning if he or she is, for instance, serving in the US military abroad, or if he or she is employed in an American firm abroad. Besides these exceptions, you must have been an LPR in the US for at least 3 years before you can initiate the naturalization process as a foreign spouse of a US citizen. But to fulfill this requirement, you will need a residence permit to live in the US before, so that you can actually get to the point of having had your residence there for 3 years. And the way to go here for a foreign spouse of a US citizen who does not yet have a US residence permit already is to apply for a marriage green card. To obtain a marriage green card, the main point is to prove that your marriage is valid, or what's called bona fide, which pretty much means that it is not just a fake to obtain a US residence permit. Based on the current information on the internet, the timeline to obtain a marriage green card is 9 to 11 months, so you definitely want to make sure that you start this process in time. Based on my personal work experience though, I imagine that this is a pretty average timeline, which can always vary a bit depending on where you apply for the marriage green card, and of course depending on the facts of the individual case. Without going into too much detail here, there are basically 2 procedures that can be initiated to obtain a marriage green card for the US, depending on whether you as the foreign spouse of the US citizen live abroad or in the US already. For instance, if you're living abroad, you will have to attend a green card interview at a US embassy or consulate. On the other hand, if you are living in the US already, you will have to attend the interview with your US spouse at your local USCIS office, which is the Migration Service office at your place of residence. The interviewing officer's primary goal will be to assess whether your marriage is real or not. Once you pass the interview, and if you fulfill all the other requirements that are necessary, you will obtain a marriage green card, which allows you to live in the US with your US spouse. After having lived there together with your US spouse for 3 years, you can initiate the naturalization process, which brings us back to today's topic. Regarding the timing of your application for US citizenship, another point to mention here is that when you apply, you must have been living within the state or district having jurisdiction over your place of residence for at least 3 months prior to your application. Closely linked to the requirement of residence in the US is the requirement of physical presence in the US. Because to obtain American citizenship, you must have been physically present in the US for at least 18 months or 548 days immediately before the date on which you file your application. If you are now wondering what the difference is of having had your residence in the US and being physically present there, just think about the example of being on a vacation abroad. During your vacation, your place of residence will still be at your home in the country where you usually live, even though during the vacation you won't be physically present there. Now, when it comes to the physical presence in the US, the INA, Immigration and Nationality Act, is quite strict, stating the following. In the event that the alien spouse, which means the foreign spouse, has never been in the United States, eligibility under this section is not established even though the alien spouse resided abroad in marital union with the citizen spouse during the 3-year period. In combination with the residence requirement, this pretty much means the following. If you did not live in the US for 3 years as a foreign spouse, you cannot get American citizenship after 3 years of marriage. And during the 3 years of residence in the US prior to your application for citizenship, you must have been physically present there for at least 18 months. Of course, during the 3-year period, you are allowed to leave the US for a vacation and even for a long one. However, if you leave the country for more than 6 months, this will most likely become a problem because your continuous residence in the US will be considered interrupted. And you will therefore not have been living in the US continuously for 3 years anymore, which means you will have to start at 0 again. While all the requirements that we looked at so far were pretty formal, to obtain American citizenship, you must also be able to read, write and speak English in an ordinary usage, which is the language skill requirement. This will be tested based on your answers to the questions on your eligibility interview. In addition to speaking English, you will also have to prove that you have knowledge and understanding of the fundamentals of American history and of the principles and form of government of the United States, also known as the civics. In fact, there are 100 civics questions on the naturalization test. An example for these questions are the following. What is the supreme law of the land? The House of Representatives has how many voting members? If both the president and the vice president can no longer serve, who becomes president? When is the last day you can send in federal income tax forms? If you want to have a look at all of the 100 civics questions, I will leave a link in the description box of this video for you to check them out. During the naturalization interview, you will be asked up to 10 questions out of these 100 questions, and you must answer at least 6 of them correctly to pass the civics test. Besides this knowledge, if you want to obtain American citizenship, the competent authorities will also assess if you demonstrate a good moral character for at least 3 years before your application. In addition to that, they will check your attachment to the principles of the US Constitution and if you are well disposed to the good order and happiness of the United States. While they may sound a little complicated, these criteria pretty much aim at reviewing your integration in the United States in general, meaning whether you obey the law, stay out of trouble, if you are working, if you are socialized in American society, and if you know the habits of life there. And with that being said, we're getting to the end of today's video, but if you have made your own experience with the American naturalization process or with obtaining a marriage green card in the US, please feel free to share some of your experience in the comment section down below, because I would love to hear more about it. Other than that, as always, I hope that you guys found the information in this video helpful. And if so, feel free to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you want to make sure not to miss any videos in the future. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to be talking to you again soon.